right, so I think we're going to get started. For those who are new, welcome to Hartford City Hall. My name is Wildelise Bermudez, and I'm a councilwoman here in Hartford, and I am joined here by...
Hi, my name is Councilwoman Claudine Fox, and I represent Hartford.
And Matt Ritter, I'm the state representative for the 1st Assembly District in Hartford and the House Majority Leader at the Capitol.
And so we have some amazing, really leading experts that are here with us who have traveled all the way from California and New York. And we're very excited to have Amber Center along with Kirsten Jourdan. And we're very happy to have this be the 3rd community forum on cannabis. So just to give a little background of how all this happened, we also want to thank all of you who are joining us here today for this important discussion on the legalization of cannabis. And it's a focus really on achieving racial equity in ownership, employment, and consumer access across the board, not just for Hartford, but for our entire state. What does that look like? And I want to thank all of our presenters who are here with us. This has been an ongoing series. This is our final one. Hopefully we'll have others in different cities throughout Connecticut. New Haven said they want to be the next one, so I think that might be happening very soon as their aldermen and women are passing a resolution as we speak. And so this is a time for us to really say thank you to our panelists who are women of color and are taking the time here to be with us and helping our city to ensure that we have policies on the ground that are grounded in economic justice and healing the damage that has been caused by the war on drugs in our communities. And we want to thank, of course, our elected officials who are here supporting this forum and who are doing their own work as well at the state level. Thank you, State Representative Majority Leader Ritter. And this forum in particular is an importance to us on the City of Hartford as we deal with social and economic impacts on the war on drugs of our city and for our community overall, at a time where states and cities, if we look to our right, if we look to our left, have begun to legalize and decriminalize the cannabis industry in our communities of color. But then again, we're still, for many of our communities, they're still being persecuted for growing and selling cannabis. And so this prohibition has ripped families apart. We recognize this. It's been denying our people the same economic opportunities compared to more affluent communities. And so it has been the hope of this city council through these forums, having passed a resolution to have these conversations and for the city to develop an economic feasibility study on what will happen when it becomes legal in terms of taxing cannabis and having industries here. And so it's about policy changes that we need to see on the ground, but with experts that we have and their recommendations, then it will really allow us to create a real economic opportunity for our communities. And so we are all committed to the economic empowerment of Hartford and for our people of color, our communities of color, our communities overall. And so today with this final community forum, it's another step forward toward a more equitable future. And I also want to thank Jason Ortiz, who's really been leading from behind. You have leaders in the front, you have leaders from behind. And he's someone who's been really leading this effort. And if it wasn't for Jason's work and commitment to this policy and this cause, we would have never had these forums to begin with. So we really want to give a shout out to Jason as well. So the format itself, we're going to have our 2 leading experts who are here. They will each be presenting. They'll have 10 minutes for the presentation, really honing down on the topic of their choice. And then at the end of the presentation, there will be questions. So the first presenter, and Amber, will be presenting, and shortly after, we will be able to open up with questions from elected officials. We also want to hear questions from the audience. We'll have paper, although we're a very small group, but we can jot down paper on piece of paper and pen some of the questions that you guys have as well. And then we will have our second presenter as well. So our overall goal with these series is for City Council then, based on residents' questions and based on just everyone's input and our experts to put together recommendations so that we can actually formally adopt a cannabis ordinance for the city. And then we will present that to our state legislature as part of the 2019 session to ensure a campaign for more equitable cannabis industry in Connecticut. We also want to hear from our state representative, Ritter, who wants to mention a little bit more about what's happening at the state level.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Jason, thanks for the water, too. That's going to be very helpful. I'll be very brief. I'm going to have the great pleasure of introducing Amber Center, and I want to just thank Councilman Bermudez and everybody in the Hartford City Council and staff who put this together. It's very helpful. Let me give you a 1-minute review of where we are in the state of Connecticut, because ultimately, nothing that happens locally can change state law, and unlike California and other states where they've legalized marijuana, they have direct initiatives in those states. So you can get petitions, you can force a referendum vote, and that's how marijuana, I think, became legal in California. That's how it became legal in Massachusetts. That option does not exist in Connecticut. We'd have to amend our Constitution to do it. So the easiest way to do it is to pass a law in the House and Senate, have the governor sign it, and I do think that will happen. But here's where we are, and my job as the majority leader is to know where the 80 Democratic votes are in our caucus. People always say, how close are you to passing it in the House? Well, I don't know, because there's going to be new representatives in 2018 in November that get elected. But to give you an idea where we were last year, we were probably 10 to 15 votes short. So it's not 50 votes, but it's not 0. And that number can go up or down depending on who wins in November. But just to give you a little background, in 2011, we decriminalized the possession of marijuana. It's still illegal to distribute over a certain amount of marijuana, but basically we've decriminalized it. So marijuana is, for all intents and purposes, legal in the state of Connecticut. If you were caught and a cop was really angry at you and was having a bad day, he could give you a ticket. It could be a civil infraction, but it's no different than a parking ticket or a speeding ticket. So it's really been legal for 7 years. As long as you mind your own business and stay in your own house, pretty much, no one's going to bother you with it. Further, since 2011, what has happened is we've established a robust medical marijuana program in Connecticut. We now have 30,000 users of medical marijuana in Connecticut. There were 8 conditions just added last week. Every month, it seems, or every 2 months, we're adding 3 or 4 conditions. We even allow it now for seizures for children under the age of 18. So it is used from people as old as 1 or 2 years old and as old as 90, 95 years old in this state. So medical marijuana, we have growers. There's been no abuse of the system. We had a lot of people vote against it when we first passed it. It's now a model for the country. We haven't had one example of anyone. There was all these concerns that people would fake conditions, and actually it's worked very, very well. Doctors are very prudent in their recommendations, and it's been a success story. So it's decriminalized. We have a robust medical marijuana program, yet we still can't pass it. And since 2014 and 15, we've had numerous states legalize it. Vermont, Massachusetts, right to the north of us. New York, I believe, is very close to doing it as well under Governor Cuomo. So you have to ask the question, what the hell are we doing in Connecticut? It makes no sense. So ultimately, I think that when Massachusetts, their example, and New York do it ultimately, Rhode Island's not far behind, you can drive across the border, you can buy it, you can bring it back, nobody's going to stop you, and if they did, it would be a civil ticket, they might confiscate it. At some point, Connecticut will legalize it. The main opposition to it from people in the legislature is normally twofold. One is they think that it's unhealthy. They think it's a bad influence on children. Those folks are very hard to move. They are set in their views, in many cases generational. It's folks that are, frankly from a different time, and they view it a very different way than maybe younger folks or our generation might. The second argument against it is that we're only doing it for the revenue. It's a revenue grab, right? And we haven't really thought about the consequences of it or how best to do it. And I don't understand that argument at all. It's not a revenue grab. It will create revenue like it is in other states, but we tax a million things. And so it's like any other product. We didn't complain when the internet came about and we started taxing that, like iTunes and things like that. We tax Amazon, all these modern products. So that argument doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. Last thought for you on where Connecticut's going. There's been bills introduced every year. We will have bills again next year. They're often introduced by 3 or 4 different committees of cognizance. There's often 3 or 4 public hearings. So there'll be a lot of opportunity for anyone in this room to testify again. One difference, too, is our outgoing governor, Daniel Malloy, who actually has been a very good advocate on a lot of social justice issues, he was against the legalization of marijuana and always has been. So he had always said he would veto that bill. So one of the thoughts in our caucus has been that even if we passed it by 1 or 2 votes and the Senate passed it by 1 vote, the governor was going to veto it and we didn't have the votes to override the veto. So a lot of folks from districts where it's maybe a little more polarized of an issue were not always keen on voting for something that wasn't going to become law. There's not a lot of bravery in that, but maybe political savviness for them. So I think if we have a new governor that is in favor of legalization, I think if we get the right balance of House and Senate members, there's a very good shot, maybe 50-50, that it passes in the next 2 years. And I would say, looking out 4 to 5 years, with other states around us having it, I would say it grows to about 75% likelihood that we'll have it, which is why this is so instrumental. If we're not on the ground floor thinking about how does it benefit Hartford, New Haven, Bridgeport, property tax, jobs, small business owners, then we would have missed the boat. And the medical marijuana program, for all of its successes, the one thing that I've heard is it has not really done a lot in terms of employing folks from communities like Hartford. We do have a facility here. It does pay taxes, but we could do a better job of that. So that's the challenge. That's also the opportunity that lays ahead. And so what the City Council and Wilderleys are doing is really ahead of the curve, and it's going to be very exciting. So I bored you all to death with a 5-minute presentation on the state, but I hope that was helpful. Oh, yes. Yes.
A couple of other elected officials.
I'll let you do that if you want.
We
Yes.
have a
But I
couple of
do
other
know
elected
TJ Clark.
officials on the room. So yes, we have Council Member TJ Clark, who's joined us. Thank you so much. We also have from Hamden, all the way from Hamden, Justin Farmer, Council Member there as well. And so we've been lucky enough in these community conversations to draw people not just from Hartford, but elected officials from across the state. And so thank you so much for being here.
All right. Councilman Clark, welcome. Councilman Farmer, welcome to the heat of Hartford City Hall. I'm going to introduce Amber Center, who's the founder of Supernova Woman Leisure Life Edibles. Amber Center is a young 37 and a marketer who formerly worked with Fortune 500 companies on major designs. A U.S. Coast Guard veteran, Center moved to California's Bay Area in February 2014 after being diagnosed with lupus and needing a safe access to medical cannabis. Once in California, she began networking and using her marketing background to help elevate cannabis brands. She started Supernova Woman with Lencho and Nina Parks in 2015 after seeing a need for people of color to have space in the industry. Center now owns a cannabis-infused products company, Leisure for Life, along with a pre-rolled joint company, California Rolls. So I will, at this time, turn it over, and we welcome you all the way from California. Thanks for being here.
Hello? All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much to the City of Hartford and the City Council members for inviting me here to present this evening. Today I'm going to be speaking a lot about Oakland's equity program and a little bit about my organization, Supernova Women. We were pretty instrumental in helping Oakland to shape their equity program. I'm not sure if you know this, but Oakland was the first city in the United States to adopt a cannabis equity program. So we worked very closely with Oakland's city council members as well as the city administrator's office to come up with some suggestions and parameters for the equity program, and I'm just going to talk a bit about what Oakland has been up to. I'm actively participating in both Oakland's and San Francisco's equity programs. I am the general partner, so I don't qualify for equity, but I've partnered with folks that do. So I'm a co-founder of Supernova Women. Supernova is a space for women of color in cannabis. And what we do is we work to create self-sufficient shareholders within the cannabis industry through education, advocacy, and networking. My name is Amber Center. I'm a CEO and founder of Leisure Life and co-founder and executive director of Supernova. And as I mentioned, we work with community engagement, education, advocacy, and networking. And so we hold a lot of educational panels, panel discussions that discuss the laws and regulations surrounding the industry. We also provide access to professionals in a low-cost to no-cost way to ensure accessibility. So most of our events are either free or on a sliding scale of a very, very small fee of less than $10 typically. We also participate in professional associations and panel discussions to help grow the problem-solving capacity of our peers. So we've held events in San Francisco, LA, Oakland, as well as Boston. We advocate quite heavily at the city level. So this picture was actually us at an Oakland City Council meeting discussing the Oakland Cannabis Ordinance as well as the equity program. But policy is very important, and it shapes the way that we can conduct our business. So it's very important for us to get involved, especially by participating early, because the process, we can offer research and testimony and aid in creating the pathways to lower the barriers for us to be able to operate within the space. So we attend local state meetings, lobby days, and contribute public comment. We actually just submitted public comment yesterday for California's final regulations. And we've been able to keep our issues at the table because we contribute and we work to find solutions with lawmakers. We also host a number of networking events. We just held one last week that was primarily for women of color looking to operate within the industry. So we'll hold these types of events. We'll do coffee and cannabis events in the morning, just for folks to kind of come together and talk about different topics that we have. We've had a discussion about the equity program, of course, and we have one coming up about civic engagement because it's very important for folks to know how to engage with the civic leaders. And all of the Supernova board members are entrepreneurs, so we understand the challenges and barriers that we face. So our communities have been attacked and victimized by the war on drugs by sending people to jail, straining family financial stability, and creating negative stigmas inside and outside of our communities. Black and brown people are 3 times more likely than white people to be arrested for cannabis. And this data here is from Oakland in 2015. So Oakland's been decriminalized, or the state of California has been decriminalized since, I think, 1996. And this data is from 2015, so it's not that old, and you can, I'll kind of point out some of the disparities here, what's happening. If you look at white groups, they make up 31% of the population. African Americans make up 30% of the population. Latinos, also about 30%. So it's about 30, with Asians being 7% in Oakland. But if you see our cannabis arrest rates, it's 4% for whites and 77% for African Americans. So that's a huge disparity, even in a post-decriminalized arena we're talking about. This is 2015, in California. So drug enforcement policies have had a lasting effect on disadvantaged communities. Possessing a criminal record can keep someone unemployable, as demonstrated in the African American unemployment rates that are more than 3 times as high as white unemployment rates. So Oakland, on May 23rd, 2017, launched its cannabis permit application process for individuals that are interested in participating in the cannabis industry. And the application process is part of the equity permit program that minimizes barriers to cannabis licensing for Oakland residents who have been most victimized by the war on drugs. So during the initial permitting phase, a minimum of half of all of the permits have to be issued to equity applicants, and the other half go to general applicants. Now, how do you qualify for equity in Oakland? There are 3 ways to qualify. An eligible equity applicant is an Oakland resident who's basically lived in one of the police beats, one of 21 police beats for 10 of the last 20 years, or you have a cannabis conviction stemming from the city of Oakland. And so you can qualify with either one of those, meeting either one of those qualifications, but you also have to meet an income requirement, which is you must show an annual income at or less than 80% of the average median income in Oakland. So that's one way to qualify, but if you're like me and you don't qualify for equity, then you can be an incubator. And so the city has basically set up a reward for general applicants that provide free space and incubate equity applicants. And as an incubator, you receive priority processing over the other general applicants. So you're moved to the front of the line and you're basically able to operate much faster than waiting waiting for the one-to-one equity to general ratio to move through. And so the general applicants have to provide 3 years rent of 1,000 square feet for free to equity applicants in order to get this priority licensing. In Oakland, the average rent is $3 a square foot, so that's about a $3,000 a month bill. So there are currently 116 registered equity businesses in the city of Oakland. And within Oakland's cannabis ordinance, the city will provide technical assistance and low-interest loans to equity applicants. The City of Oakland selected Make Green Go and Forefront Partners to provide technical and financial assistance to equity applicants for the next year. Make Green Go provides technical assistance, so they do things like they'll host workshops, consultations, courses on how to write business plans, how to create financial projections, how to do a pitch deck, marketing, what is marketing, all these things. And Elevate Impact administers the revolving loan program. So Oakland set up a loan program as part of the equity program. It's a $3.4 million fund. So the city of Oakland was able to get these funds by the tax revenue that was generated from cannabis sales, as well as some of the permit fees that was associated with the general applicants' permits. All of the equity permit fees were waived, but they pulled from the general and put it into this fund. So in order for equity applicants to qualify for these loans that are within this program, they're expected to provide a business plan, a pitch deck, 3 years of financial projections, and be in good standing with the city and state. Are these resources enough? So, working within the program, I've seen both sides of kind of what's happening in the program. And I'm not an equity applicant, I'm a general. So I've seen how some people have been able to enter a great mentorship program with their general partner. These general partners, as I mentioned before, it's about $3,000 a month for them to provide space, and that's not including security and all these other things. So the general partners are going to be well-funded businesses. We're not talking small business here. So I've seen a lot of them be able to offer mentorship, set up strategic partnerships with their equity partners. You know, some of them are partnered on delivery services. Maybe they're partnered on distribution or partnered on manufacturing. And also, they've been able to some of these folks, equity applicants, have been able to get up and running pretty quickly and capturing some market share that's out there. We kind of had a mass exodus in California when the regulations kicked in, and a lot of folks were not able to continue operating, which caused product shortages and a number of things. So if you're able to hurry up and get your stuff together and get on the shelves, you're winning. And so a lot of folks, some folks in the equity program have been pretty successful there, but then we've also had some pitfalls. Breaches of contract have been pretty common. Equity partners suing their general applicants for breaching their contracts, and some of these things have been, the general partners have been able to operate because they've been giving this priority licensing, because they've shown on the paper that they are partnered with equity applicants, but then when it comes for them to make their deliverables, which would be the space, they're not doing it. So the general partners are operating and creating revenue and running their businesses while their equity partners are just hanging. And that's been a really big problem. And the city of Oakland, you know, has a lot of pressure on them because folks want these general partners' licenses revoked. You know, like, you can't operate if I'm not operating. But the city has kind of stepped back and doesn't want to enforce it. So that's been causing a lot of problems. The lack of technical assistance. So I mentioned before, the city has hired a consultant to help with technical assistance. However, most of the technical assistance that folks need is lawyers. You know, we're entering these really, really complex contracts, and these folks, a lawyer retainer is minimum $5,000. And lots of people don't have $5,000 to just put up to give to a lawyer to review a contract so that they can start, at least enter into a partnership where they can start to generate some revenue. So that has been a really big problem, is the lack of technical assistance provided to the equity applicants. And then, of course, I would say our number one problem, which all of these things kind of circulate around, is access to capital. The city is just now getting around to getting ready to start issuing these loans and doing interviews and accepting applications for these loans. But the program was launched in May of 2017. So that's been a really long time where folks have not been able to operate or have not had any capital. And then, even then, like I mentioned, the loan fund is $3.4 million. There's 116 equity businesses. You do the math, that's about $30,000. That's not enough money to get going in this industry. You need at least $100,000 as an equity applicant with free rent. And then, of course, all of these things lead the equity partner to feeling like they're not operating from a position of power. So they're not going to speak up on their behalf, especially if they're not being heard, and then they just slip through the cracks. And that's a really big problem. So in conclusion, we must right the wrongs created by the war on drugs and protect our communities from being further discriminated against in this industry. We've also got to protect these groups that do qualify for equity, because they are coming from areas that were over-policed. They are coming from areas where there are no resources. They are coming from high poverty areas. And really, they are our most vulnerable in our community, and anyone can dangle a carrot in front of them, and they might take it. And it might not be the best carrot because they haven't had a lawyer look at the carrot. So we've really got to, when we're implementing these equity programs, we've got to make sure that big business cannot come in and leverage these programs and take advantage of our communities even further. And thank you very much for having me. You can hit me up in any of these ways. Feel free to send me an email. And definitely follow Supernova. Our Instagram is pretty much the most up-to-date and best way to kind of follow what we're doing. So, yeah, please follow us, and thank you so much. I haven't heard of anything of competition or anything like that. I think that most of the generals are much larger businesses, so they're able to be more of a mentor and help versus compete. And there's a lot of room in the cannabis industry in California for growth, so I haven't really. So let's see, some of the partnerships that I've seen, a lot of larger manufacturers are incubating distributors or delivery services so that the general can give product to the delivery service or the distributor, and and exclusive contracts, those kinds of things. Like, those are very helpful because it's getting harder and harder to operate kind of distribution companies out there because the products are very limited. Like I mentioned before, there's product shortages, things like that. So manufacturers can be kind of choosy on where they want their product to be or who they want to carry their product. And these kinds of strategic partnerships have been very helpful for the equity partners. Sure. So I've actually applied for, I'm in the dispensary race right now. So it's kind of a land grab right now in California as far as getting real estate and trying to get these licenses as quickly as possible, because a lot of us feel that they're going to put a cap on the dispensaries. And so I feel like it's really important for me to have retail outlets for Black and brown businesses, because, like I mentioned, a lot of these retailers and distributors will not carry our products once the markets are established and contracts are in place. And we need to make sure we have retail outlets to sell this stuff, you know? So I feel like right now it's really important for Black and brown folks to get cannabis licenses, and then also for us to kind of hold the whole chain from cultivation to manufacturing to distribution to retail. And so I moved to California in 2014. I was diagnosed with lupus. I was living in Chicago at the time. And I had a friend in Oakland who ran an edibles company and asked if I wanted to be his sales and marketing person. So I was all over it, you know. It was scary because I was really sick at the time. I had just been diagnosed with lupus. And I just decided to do it because I knew that California had, I would have access to a lot of different products that I just didn't have in Chicago. And so I moved there. I got much better once about 6 months. And I just kind of started networking and working a lot. I ended up working for a consulting firm, and that's how I met one of my Supernova co-founders, Sunshine Lencho, who's an attorney, a Stanford attorney in California. And she and I, as well as Nina Parks, really noticed the disparities that were happening. Nina Parks and I met at a cannabis convention, and we were the only 2 women of color in the place, and we thought that was a problem. And Sunshine and I, we worked at a consulting firm together, writing winning applications for groups around the country. And at this time, we were working on Maryland, and we noticed that all of the groups that we were helping were very well-funded white groups, white male groups. And we said, wow, you know, we're essentially kind of gentrifying our own industry by helping these people with our knowledge. And, you know, they're paying $60,000 for us to write these applications for them. And so we said, what can we do to give this information that we have for free to our communities? So we just started hosting these panel discussions and workshops and things like this at very, very low or no cost, just to try and get our folks up to speed on what was happening. And so I started Supernova, and at the same time, I also became the COO of a dispensary in West Oakland, Magnolia. And I ran that place for about 1.5 years. And I did a number of things for that company. I got us an on-site consumption permit. So now Magnolia is the only dispensary in the East Bay that where you can consume cannabis at the dispensary. Was pretty strategic in us purchasing a restaurant that's contiguous to our space, and that's where the lounge is. And then I also helped our management group obtain a permit for a dispensary in Berkeley. And that was a very competitive process. And I said, wow, like, I'm helping all these people do all this stuff. I need to do something for myself. So I left and started my manufacturing company, making pre-rolls and popcorn. And now we see the opportunity and the need to get retail locations, and I have some experience with it, so like, we need to get as many retail outlets as we can. So now we're actively pursuing that in San Francisco. There's a lot. Yes. Yes, and it's a big problem. It's been a problem for a long time. Like black and brown folks getting on certain dispensary shelves because there's one person who kind of controls it, and that's the buyer. The buyer is typically a white guy. So how do you get in that good old boys network, you know? Exactly, it's create our own network. Oh, for me? Oh, she asked, what does the process look like for me to obtain a dispensary license? It's very expensive. It's very expensive. It's very political. It's a dance all around, especially in a challenging area like San Francisco with real estate. So, you know, I've had to do a number of things. I brought on partners that are real estate brokers and given them a minority share. You know, I've done things like I also have a political consultant, a lobbyist. You know, and then not just that, then there's also me that's out there constantly grinding talking to folks, having community meetings, things like that. I also had to hire a land use attorney. You know, so I mean, my attorney's retainer was 10 grand. You know, that's just the attorney. So this whole process up until I get licensed is costing me about $350,000. And I don't even, it's not even guaranteed that I'll get a license. This is the amount it costs up until I get the license. Then after I get the license, I'm gonna raise another 2.75 million for 2 dispensaries, not just 1, 2. And the reason why I'm doing 2, and I'm gonna try to do another one, is because it's so expensive operating with all of these overhead costs, the compliance especially, like navigating the taxes. We have to have a tax attorney, you know, which I do have a tax attorney. And we have to have an HR person. You know, you don't want to have all of these things with one dispensary. I mean, you've got to have a few to spread those costs out over. So that's the reason for that. You know, I mean, really, I feel like it looks like it's definitely areas that have been disadvantaged by the war on drugs. So those folks, but a lot of technical assistance and a loan program, but not as small as Oakland's. It's got to be something really robust. I've been working with Senator Bradford on SB 1294 in California, and that's a state equity program that they're working on. And you know, I would love to see things like if you have a certain amount of cannabis licenses, if you have over a certain amount, you have to pay like a monopoly tax, and that tax goes back into an equity fund. Because there are some folks that have 300 cultivation licenses. You know, there's one company in particular that does. They happen to be friendly. I like them, but still, you know, that is happening, and there are definitely retail kind of monopolies starting to happen as well. So when you get these companies that are able to kind of come in and have 15 dispensary chains, then they dictate the price in the market. So then how do small businesses compete? Someone that's got 3, 2, 1 dispensary. How do they compete with someone that's buying $500,000 of one product a month and able to slash that price by 15 to 20%? It's tough. We're working on that. You know, maybe Jason can chime in a little bit on that. I want to say MCBA. Okay. Yeah. So MCBA has definitely been working the hemp angle. Supernova, not so much, but we're getting there. But yeah.
ask, what is the relationship between realtors and insurance companies with Supernova? How are realtors and insurance companies dealing with the cannabis industry growing?
I mean, I see realtors and insurance companies that come to our events. We don't really have any kind of, anything formalized with any groups like that. And really, I like for us to stay neutral in those kinds of situations anyway, because the real estate game has gotten really, really intense out there. I mean, you'll see some rates and retail locations in San Francisco that are $30 a square foot, and that's just unfathomable. It's pretty crazy. So the real estate is kind of all over the place, and yeah, I mean, we know some realtors, but that's not something we necessarily like kind of engage with and have these people and introduce them to folks like that. They come to our networking events.
I got a few questions over here from the cards. And so one is, besides big business within the cannabis industry, are there other practices outside of the cannabis industry that have stood in the way of true equity in the cannabis industry? So are other industries getting involved and messing things up?
Are other industries getting involved? Yes, the unions.
Okay.
Big time. And really, I grew up in a union household. My mom been a member of the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers since I could remember. But really, with the employers offering so many benefits and things like that, I feel like the unions have been having a problem competing in the current workforce. So they kind of have to force themselves on new industries like cannabis, and they have in a very big way. There are a lot of labor peace agreements and contracts that have been kind of forced on cannabis businesses in California, and it concerns me because the union is not for small business. Unions are for bigger businesses, but most cannabis businesses, especially black and brown business, are small. And a lot of these agreements that are coming out are just going to choke out small business because they are so intense, offering things that we just cannot provide because we're too small of a business. So, yeah, the unions, big time.
All right, and then we have one more, then we'll move on in the interest of time. But has there been any pushback to equity programs? If so, from who, and how have you organized despite the pushback?
There's been a lot of pushback, especially from small business. And really, I cannot blame small business because it has essentially cut out small business if you do not qualify for equity. So, for instance, in Oakland, there is no pathway for a small business. Let's say you've got 1,000 square feet in your space. You cannot incubate another person because you only have 1,000 square feet. You need 2,000 square feet to be able to incubate. And a lot of these folks just can't handle that expense. I mean, it's $3,000 a month. That's $36,000 a year. That over those 3 years, it's around $100,000. That's a lot of money for us to budget to go to the program. So I was really hoping that Oakland would consider other ways that general applicants could help equity applicants outside of space because it is such a big expense for a small business. One of the ideas that was floated was paying a 1% tax that goes into the equity fund, which is another tax, which is hard, but that was really one of the only things that we could think of to where we're still contributing, but it's not crippling a small business.
if you would like a piece of paper, just raise your hand. And also just a reminder that there is water here if anybody's getting hot or thirsty.
All right. So our second presenter will be Kirsten Jourdan, chair of the Newman Ferrara's Emerging Cannabis and Hemp Practice Group. Kirsten has over 20 years of real estate, state licensing, government regulatory experience. Kirsten currently advises laboratory testing facilities, operators, retailers, ancillary businesses, and nonprofit organizations in the cannabis and hemp industries. Prior to joining the firm, Kirsten served as a real estate director for several corporate and real estate departments where she sourced deals, prepared financial modeling, executed transaction requirements, and managed office, retail, and call center portfolios. Kirsten received her undergraduate degree at the State University of New York at Albany and her law degree from the University of Richmond T.C. Williams School of Law. She was a Professor Willie L. Moore Summer Fellow during her studies at Cambridge University at Emmanuel College in the UK. She is currently an active member of the Korean American Lawyers Association of Greater New York, the National Cannabis Bar Association, New York City Cannabis Bar Association, Minority Cannabis Bar Association, and the New York State Bar Association, where she serves on the Committee on Cannabis Law. Take it away.
Good evening. Before I begin, I'd like to thank the Honorable Councilwoman Bermudez, distinguished members of the Hartford City Council, respected community leaders, interested residents, and my fellow advocates and activists, and specifically Jason Ortiz, for inviting me to address you and for making time to create space for this discussion. I'm an attorney, activist, and small business owner in the cannabis space. I've devoted my personal and professional life for the past 4 years to the legalization and regulation of this industry, and emphatically believe that this is the only industry that creates pathways to generational wealth and addresses income inequality faced by so many people of color and marginalized communities. In July of 2015, I had the good fortune to be introduced to Mike Lewis, an industrial hemp farmer from Livingston, Kentucky. While not unique, Mike's story was a vivid reminder of the failure of our government to care for and treat the resulting conditions of service to our country. Mike's story, as documented by retailer Patagonia in the short film Harvesting Liberty, write that down, you're going to want to watch that. Harvesting Liberty diverges from that of the all too common narrative which eventually results in opiate addiction. Mike's farming roots and community building efforts ultimately led to his alliance with Senator Mitch McConnell, who provided Mike the opportunity to testify before Congress in support of the 2014 Farm Bill, which is the precursor to state industrial hemp pilot programs. Today, 40 states have removed the barriers to industrial hemp production. This includes Connecticut's border states, Rhode Island and New York, with active commercial pilot programs and access to production grants. The third border state, Massachusetts, has affirmatively placed commercial production of industrial hemp within the Department of Agricultural Resources, but has not yet released the formal rules and regulations. While it appears that Connecticut's first step in defining industrial hemp seemed to gain traction in 2015, and again in 2017 when SB 603 made it to the Senate floor, movement for formalizing a program seems to be stalled. Tonight, I implore you to take action on this emerging economy. I've spent the last 4 years learning from and partnering with farmers like Mike Lewis and Tolland, Connecticut's Michelle Bicking, who's in the audience tonight. Michelle is the owner of Hidden Acres Farm, a Black woman-owned nonprofit which provides training and workshops on food and environmental justice. I'm currently working with several licensees in my home state of New York who are building supply chain networks and creating market opportunities where none previously existed in the US. I also have the privilege of consulting with New York State Assemblywoman Tremaine Wright, who represents the predominantly Black and brown communities of Bedford-Stuyvesant and Crown Heights, Brooklyn, where we are exploring rooftop hemp gardens, which will be processed at a local community facility. With the over 500 plus uses of industrial hemp, only one of which, producing and processing CBD from the plant's flower, is under federal scrutiny, the opportunities for commercializing this plant are endless. The potential impact from a regulated industrial hemp commercial program includes the obvious elements from a new industry, such as job creation, skilled training opportunities, and marketplace activities. Because of the uniqueness and international reach of the plant, industrial hemp also includes full supply chain opportunities, including genetics, harvest, production, processing, and retail and wholesale markets, both national and international. For example, one of the sectors that most interests me is the genetic component of the industry. Specifically, seeds, cloning, and tissue culture has seen tremendous movement, but without federal descheduling is unable to offer consistency and is often cost prohibitive for many low-income farmers. Just 3 years ago, hemp seeds were selling at $1.50 per seed, and now are approximately 30 cents a seed. Experts tell me the price should be around 5 cents a seed for stable seeds. However, stable seeds are hard to come by. States like Connecticut have the opportunity and perhaps the responsibility to lead the U.S. by creating programs and providing grant money to support research and development around stabilizing seeds, which includes breeding technologies, tissue cultures, cloning, and seed reproduction. Another example of opportunities resulting from a formal program is for licensed professionals. This industry has seen a huge spike in the number of professional services specifically catering to all aspects of the industrial hemp supply chain. Lawyers, accountants, insurance agents, commercial real estate brokers, educators, engineers, architects, land use professionals, tradesmen and tradeswomen are finding niche areas of the industry to market their specialized services and skill sets. I hope that I've given you some insight into the potential for industrial hemp and the people of Connecticut. Like its cousin, cannabis, industrial hemp, if regulated thoughtfully, can provide entry points for all people, regardless of status, wealth, or other traditional barriers. I appreciate your willingness to host this discussion, and I welcome any questions or comments. Thank you again. And by all means, I'm happy to answer questions about specifically industrial hemp, pilot programs happening around the country to the extent that I'm aware, and certainly anything that's happening in New York in terms of legalization or the medical program. Thank you. Sure. So I had some trouble figuring that out myself. I actually made a couple of calls and did some Googling, and the best I came up with is that there is a bill that says that there's supposed to be rules and regs put in place by July 2018. Now that bill, I believe, made it to the Senate floor, but did not get ultimately signed, and that was last year. I believe it's SB 306, if I'm not mistaken. So it's my understanding, talking to colleagues in the industry in Connecticut, that there are people who are just growing. And because you have defined industrial hemp as 0.3% THC or lower, that suffices in terms of, in lieu of a pilot program, a formal program. So I don't see that there's any opportunity for commercialization of that. And I truly believe that that actually puts certain communities, specifically communities of color, in the crosshairs because there are people who are in law enforcement who are not familiar with the plant or the look and feel of the distinction of marijuana versus industrial hemp. So I'm not aware that there is anything formal, but I have heard that folks are growing. Folks that don't look like people in this room. I'm sorry.
How did you come about that? And is it something that could be replicated, say, for a state, like introducing UConn law students to, a certain tract on how to represent clients and business owners related to hemp production or marijuana
Yeah.
business
Well,
ownership.
Michelle, so we've known each other a little over a year now, I think it is, if not longer than that. And I'll tell you, what I do every day, and I'm sure Amber probably in the beginning of her career did the same. I just read. I read everything. I read anything that I can in terms of what's happening in other states, advice that other professionals and experts in the area have, and really where we can draw from example is overseas. China, Canada, India, they've all had vibrant hemp programs for generations. They, in fact, never prohibited in the first place. I'm aware that there are some universities that are starting to put cannabis programs together. I'm not aware of anything on the East Coast. I believe there's some stuff happening in Massachusetts, which makes a lot of sense. But specifically hemp, I'm not seeing that. I'm seeing it more in agricultural arenas. And that's really more about the cultivation and harvest and really not the market creation. And I think if I can leave you with anything, it's that you not only have to provide for a commercialization of the plant in this way, but you also have to figure out markets. So farmers can farm it all day, but if you cannot process that, and the equipment for processing, what Mike has told me is that because for generations we've not had this, the equipment that is available to us, for instance, to process cotton, it's a different fiber. They're shorter, I don't even know the technical words, but the components are different because the strands are different. Hemp is long, cotton is short. So the equipment is not available. Mike specifically made a handmade thing that he can demonstrate, but certainly it's not a viable instrument for commercialization. So that equipment itself is super expensive, and the client that we're working with in New York is positioning themselves to potentially be a processing hub for a community of former dairy farmers in upstate New York in Sullivan County. The dairy farming has dried up in that community, and farmers have a lot of land with nothing to do, and so they see hemp as a viable alternative. But without that connection point of the processing, which is super expensive, and then the end result markets, you have scenarios like last year where we had our first set of licensees go through the process, and they ended up selling all of their plant material to Canada. It was not even something that could be processed internally within the state. And so that becomes a little bit problematic, especially when you're talking about CBD. And when you're talking about transporting CBD, Amber knows all kinds of problems in California now with CBD. New York has, since we've just learned the other day, there's no formal announcement, but the processing grant, there was $5 million that Governor Cuomo was very vocal about setting aside. It's an election year. And we just saw that application process was closed. No notice, no nothing. And just through my back channels and my connections, I've heard that this has become a political thing, especially in light of what California has done in terms of CBD. And so, we think that the Department of Ag is going to give up CBD, and the Department of Health will take that on. And those implications are far-reaching because the types of requirements and the hoops that folks are going to have to jump through, not only does the Department of Health have to figure that out first, which will stall the program, but also there's no real guidelines anywhere for a lot of this. Kentucky and Denver took the lead on industrial hemp production, but I'll be honest with you, Mike's in Kentucky, and I think it was, it's 2018. In 2016, which was their second year of the program, they only had 2,500 acres that were seeded and ready to grow, and that's not adequate. Now, it's a different state of affairs today. Mitch McConnell is doing everything he can to make sure that that's a viable crop, specifically in Kentucky. But, today, without that market creation, without those end users and that connection point, you can farm it all day, but there's nothing to do.
My name is John, and I'm in the therapeutic side of hemp, so I appreciate you
Wonderful.
of that. It's all to say, I have two team members here in the audience, Miss Sarita and Miss Caroline. So we're definitely a community here in Hartford.
Wonderful.
I've actually had a couple of aha moments when you were speaking. First of all, our company purchases oil that is grown
Yep.
and extracted in exactly the Denver
Sure.
Everybody kind of thinks controlled substance. When the 2014 Farm Bill clearly delineates
That's right.
the difference between that and the crab apple and the apple of today. I mean, one is right for sweetness, and the other one is 1,000 years old, like the original plant. And so, my point being, when we can educate people on that difference, it makes all the difference in the world, because then the whole point, actually, we get more CBD, by the way, out of our stems and stalks than we do our flowers. Little point on that. But my question actually was for you, because I was in Colorado recently, and I was struck, and it seems different listening to people talk about California, but when I was in Colorado, it was like every place was like a government outlet. I mean, you walked in, I went on this bus tour where you could smoke on the bus, and they walked into several different, and every dispensary was the same. There was no originality. There were no differences in products or prices. They even looked the same. I mean, they felt the same. You walked in, it was almost militarized. So like, you would go in the sign, and they were like barking at us. It was just so weird. And so my question for you is, California like this? Because from all indications, it feels like there's much more originality and much more diversity in product, which would make me feel good.
California.
And how then the second part, how to lay that foundation for Connecticut? Because I would much rather, instead of a New Hampshire liquor outlet store, I would much rather see Jerry's plants or
Right.
something, you know what I mean?
So the diversity really comes within small business, and it's going to be very important to include small business in that. That's where you get the craft products. That's where you get the, you're not going to go to a chain dispensary that's a small business. It's going to be a 1 or 2 or 3 kind of setup shop. So really what happened in Denver is it's too expensive to operate, and the margins are just not good. So, you know, the barrier was very high. There were no equity programs or anything like that out there. So you had a select group of folks that were able to obtain licensing. And now you see, I think, I can't even remember how many edibles companies there are, but I believe there's less than 10 in Colorado, and that's a problem. And that is because the barrier was set too high, and they just cut out a whole slew of folks. And so if you want to create and maintain a diverse market, it has to be very inclusive. And by being inclusive, you have to include small business, black and brown business, you know?
One of the ways that we're thinking about that in New York is we have micro-license opportunities, similar to the craft beer industry in Brooklyn. And so that's something that we're thinking about in terms of diversifying products and also, you know, making space for small business owners.
If you look at the Home Depot, even the mom-and-pop hardware stores in Connecticut, it's a no-brainer.
Right.
In terms of the markets the products that are being developed through hemp,
Yeah.
what are the trends that you're seeing in terms of manufacturing?
Right. So, you know, the sexiest part of hemp is CBD, and it's also the most lucrative, and it's also the most volatile. And what I see, you know, in terms of my own business interests, I've been trying to broker isolate. Isolate is, you know, one day it's $7,500 a kilogram, the next day it's $10,000 a kilogram. It's a completely unregulated market. The certificates of authenticity, thank you. The COAs that, you know, are the lab testing reports, you know, they're sent around and who knows what's linked to what. I mean, it's just a very unregulated market, so it's a challenging environment to be an end user. But that being said, you know, in New York specifically, we see a lot of health and beauty. There's a lot of movement towards lotions. Yoga studios are hot on that. I publish a weekly events calendar for the cannabis space called The Maze. And in that, you know, it was fascinating for me that, you know, the majority of events are activist events in New York specifically, community events around the industry and startup and, you know, what we do to prepare in terms of small business owners, and then yoga classes. And they're all CBD infused. which is great. I think it's a great segue into the industry, not only as a small business owner or a small practitioner, but also for the general public to experience it in a way that they're not combusting, they're not smoking. It seems more accessible. They see it more as a treatment and a wellness tool. So for me, that's really an exciting way to introduce to general population. So health and wellness products, food products. We worked with a client in Vermont, actually, and this is another thing that I would suggest is that you think about banking for the hemp industry as well. We had a small business consulting. Our client had the word hemp in the name. They are fully licensed in the state of Vermont. They produce food products, specifically honey infused with hemp oil, not CBDs. Sorry, another product that I can't think of off the top of my head, but we worked with them twice, cashed second check, got a call from Citibank telling me that they were closing my account in 5 days. And we did not do anything with cannabis or marijuana. We certainly we weren't even the farmers. We were simply a consulting company. So that's something that you need to think about. I think hemp people think of it as an agricultural product and don't really consider that it is also considered Schedule I in some minds until the lawsuit's settled, because the DEA came back, was it last year or the year before? Yeah, they don't make laws, but they muddied the water, and they sure made people nervous around that. So what happened was they declassified, or they gave a number, attributed a number to derivatives of industrial hemp, which includes your flowers, which makes the CBD. And so now there's, again, they don't make the law. There are a lot of folks on one side of the fence that say, we don't have to pay any attention to this, but those who are from certain communities that are in the crosshairs will say, we want to make sure that this is acceptable so that I can move forward.
I have a question back here. So this question is about home grow. So specifically for Amber, just how California is handling home grow, what they allow, what they don't allow, but also Kristen, what you would like to see New York do in regards to home grow.
Yes, sir.
Can you repeat that one more time?
So my question is, how is California allowing folks to grow cannabis at home for their own personal use in a sort of not commercial sense? And then also for Kristen, just how would you like to see home grow or regulations be put into place?
So in the Prop 64, the legalization bill, if you're over 21, you're allowed 6 plants per person. And I believe if there are 2 folks living in the home, you can have 12 plants. But yeah, that's pretty much the limit, which is it's tough for a lot of folks because in Northern California, a lot of people made their living off of growing plants, and now they just can't jump through all these hoops, so they've had to figure out something else. And yeah, that's been tough. But yeah, in the legalization bill, up to 6 plants if you're over 21.
So in New York, advocates and activist groups all across the board pretty much agree that we need to have home grow in New York. Not only for therapeutic reasons, but also because we need to be able to produce and control our own medicine. Now, I think the challenge becomes that we don't live in the way that folks out west live. We live on top of each other. And so that presents all kinds of issues that we've not really thought through. I mean, right now, so I'm a real estate attorney. I do landlord-tenant litigation primarily. And one of the ways in which you can evict a regulated tenant is through things like having smoke emit into other areas of the apartment building or other people's apartments and not being able to ventilate properly. Now, the bigger issue really is that we do not have flower. Our medical program does not permit combustible consumption of cannabis, and so we only have concentrates and tinctures and suppositories, creams, topicals. So we just don't have flower, so I'm not sure how we connect the dots without addressing that first. But of course, it's a very important aspect, especially to communities of color who are at risk, especially living in subsidized housing, federally subsidized housing. Student loan opportunities dry up and go away. And specifically, just for your own edification, the statistics for California were outrageous. They're even worse in New York. Last year, we saw more brown and black young men between 18 and 25 arrested in Manhattan than all of the white people in every single borough. The numbers are ridiculous, and we are decriminalized also.
So you go to a bank and you say, I manufacture products. What kind of products? Products. Or what a lot of the dispensaries have done, because, you know, I mean, if you're a pretty decent shop in California, you're making $30,000 a day, and that's cash. So how do you handle this cash? Well, there's a couple of different ways. ATMs are nice because an ATM, when someone makes a withdrawal, that withdrawal amount is deposited back into your bank account that's tied to the ATM, and then you're taking the cash from your safe and putting it into the ATM. So then you're getting rid of the cash because people are making withdrawals, but then that deposit from all the withdrawals that they've made is going back into your account the next day. So when you go into dispensaries, you see almost every single dispensary has an ATM, and that is exactly why. And the other thing, dispensaries have been figuring out how to work with ATM companies to basically do ATM transactions at the register. So we're taking in that cash through, you know, through a deposit, basically, the same way as the ATM. So yeah, that's really the ways that we've been able to handle cash. And then, you know, you pay certain things in cash. The BOE, you know, the Board of Equalization, they take cash. So you know, take those, the folks that can take big chunks of money that will accept it, yeah, you just pay that in cash. I know a lot of cultivators that pay their energy and light bills in cash. So, you know, taking $30,000 down there and pay a light bill, $80,000 sometimes, but yeah.
We're finding success with regional credit unions. So, you know, the issue is at the federal level. And there are credit unions that operate locally and regionally, and those are opportunities. Now, there aren't really those opportunities for loans from those sorts of agencies, but certainly they'll let you bank with them. It's tough. I just submitted my membership fee to the Minority Cannabis Business Association through PayPal, and I just got rejected.
Great. Yeah. Yeah, even the MCBA has had problems dealing with our bank accounts of having folks just to deposit, and we're just a trade association. We don't touch the plant at all. And we've actually had multiple times where tens of thousands of dollars gets held up because we're just not allowed to access it.
When you're coming up with the name for your company, definitely keep those things in mind. Don't include cannabis, canna, marijuana, none of those things. Keep it very neutral. Leisure Life is the name of my company, you know, and our other brand of pre-rolls is California Rolls. You know, we keep everything very neutral for a reason, and it's just so, yeah, we don't have all these problems, because everybody hates on you when you got cannabis in your name. Facebook, Instagram, it don't matter. They discriminate. So.
Yeah, MCBA has to reincorporate as the Minority Business Association. We're actually technically not the Minority Cannabis Business Association. But we have a question over here.
You actually touched on what I was going to ask about the potential to home grow in New York. And I'm even wondering about how Connecticut would go about doing something like that when we can't even get legalized. So, you know, but what I wanted to ask you, I'm sorry, I didn't get names when I came in, but in California, wasn't there like 99 plants you could, or something like that you could grow, or some crazy number that you were allowed to grow before they actually just cut the numbers down to 6?
Yes, in Oakland, you were allowed to grow, what did it used to be? I don't think it was 99. I think Maine used to be 99, actually. But in California, it was a lot. We had a certain allotment. Inside, I want to say it was like 72. And then outside, it was 20 plants. And that was just within the city's ordinance. they allowed that. But then, you know, the state trumps the city's ordinance as far as that goes, so that went away. But that was nice.
We got a question over here.
You mentioned the genetics of marijuana and got into like cloning and stuff. Do you ever find that there's a divide or any like backlash when you get into like that sort of science from the marijuana community? Like especially with people that may not understand all the science behind things like genetically modified organisms and such?
So there's a big distinction between how marijuana and hemp are treated in terms of certification, right? So industrial hemp, there is an international certification program. It's called IASCA. I believe it's AOSCA. And it lists all the genetics. And so actually one of the problems that I foresee in this industry is that some of the products and the derivatives that we're seeing that came from out west are coming from food products that people have just germinated, right? Meaning you buy hemp hearts in the store, you put them in the ground and you germinate them, and then turn that into whatever it is you want it to be, a medicine or whatever it is. Well, at some point, that's going to be re-engineered, and we're going to be able to figure out whose genetics those were, and somebody's going to come calling. So that is itself its own beast. On the marijuana side, you just don't have that because you can't patent. I believe currently the only patent is owned by the U.S. government for marijuana. So it's just a different, and when you're talking marijuana, you're talking strains, and those are just creative names, as far as I understand, with some origin, but specious origin. Whereas hemp is a commodity. It's an industrial seed that's been around and part of this international process for a while.
Hemp, it is a commodity. Why isn't there, or is there, an international hemp commodity exchange? Or like, where is hemp produced the most, and what country receives the most hemp?
Yeah, so primarily 3 countries: Canada, India, and China. And in terms of where our products come from, it's primarily Canada. If you look at the back of anything at Whole Foods, it's all Manitoba. All those companies are all from Canada. And then materials and textiles and that sort of stuff comes from Asia.
Got a
When
question
you're
over
talking
here.
about industrial hemp, you're talking about over 500 uses. I mean, I saw a BMW with a car, the car door was made from industrial hemp, hempcrete. There's talk about, I get excited, there's talk about, using 3D printers and industrial hemp to create homes for people in places where, there weren't any or weren't access to that. I mean, the potential for this, even outside of CBD, which again is the only one in the crosshairs right now. When we talk about all these other things, once we put that infrastructure in, man, it's going to change the world. I mean, and that's, I don't think, putting it lightly.
So we have time for a couple more. We have one over here.
That's where I get excited when you start talking about that 3D and that's amazing because you can create small houses. You can do so much with that.
And food, you can 3D print food from
Exactly.
it.
Yeah. So that's exciting. Where do you see Jamaica and the West Indies and even South America? My parents are from Guyana, but unfortunately, it seems like Guyana has taken on the American way of doing things. So everything is, if it's illegal here, it's illegal there. And they're way more rigid and more ignorant as far as this is concerned. So where do you see the West Indies in the international market when it comes to just hemp? I mean, I know that Jamaica is sending over to Canada and they're forming their relationships there. People in Canada are looking for places in Jamaica, and that's amazing. But do you hear much about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think the conversation that I'm privy to is really more about international relationships and partnerships. And my fear is that places like the West Indies and Jamaica are not going to be able to participate because places like Canada and Germany, which are and Israel, are light years ahead, are going to occupy that space and have stronger relationships and be able to offer more, frankly, to the U.S. And so smaller, and frankly, non-white, non-European descended countries may not be able to participate unless we think thoughtfully about how to do that. Maybe, do you have any?
I think we have time for one more.
Hi, my name is Autumn Marshall. I'm a digital marketing graduate student at Sacred Heart. Can you talk to me about any advertising or marketing challenges that you see in the industry? If you can go into detail about it, please. Thank you.
Sure. So when I'm also an event planner in this space, and I put on educational events. I say this all to say, my hustle is that I'm a lawyer who hopes to do applications, but we don't have a program in New York. And so until then, I've got my hustle, and I do other things in the space to help move the conversation forward. And one of those things is to put on entrepreneurial events. And so we do these events to prepare people for these sorts of conversations. Things like not geotagging when you're taking pictures of bud, things like that, young people are so quick to Instagram things and what have you that they just don't think about that. So there are those sorts of challenges that you want to make sure that, where you are you are compliant and behaving in a compliant way. Certainly when you're representing the license organizations, they fall within programs, specifically in New York. They can't have certain kinds of signage. They can't advertise, period. In New Jersey, I know there's restrictions about advertising at events that have a percentage of children who are attending. So there's all kinds of restrictions around that. Physical signage, also restrictions. So some of the ways that they get around that is to engage folks like me who are not licensed licensed under the program, and I can have that ability to promote certain things and then bring them along for the ride. But it's challenging, and it's very specific to state.
In California, so they've come up with some guidance on how we can advertise and things like that. They require that we put our license number on our advertisements, which they quickly saw was very problematic, because now you've got all these unlicensed companies using someone else's permit number that they found on an advertisement. California has actually an exact opposite problem of what all of these other states and municipalities have been really concerned about. Everyone is concerned about diversion and product being diverted from the legal market to the unregulated market. However, California has the exact opposite problem, because we have such a surplus of unregulated material being put into the regulated market. So we have an inversion problem. And that was actually was kind of exacerbated by everybody being required to put their permit number on everything. Like, that's kind of like a social security number, in my opinion. And they're having to put it on everything, so people are just, some of the other challenges that we face, like I mentioned before, Instagram, Facebook, in their terms of service says that you cannot advertise an illegal activity, whatever it is, cannabis. So, even when we're, like Kristen mentioned, with Supernova, we're hosting events all the time. And I can't boost posts and things like that on Facebook just because we mention cannabis. And even though no one's touching the plant, all we're doing is talking about it. We're having a networking event, but yeah, so it's been very challenging. But California has been a leader in advertising for cannabis. I know my dispensary was the first to have a cannabis billboard in the state. Magnolia was. So we had a billboard for 3 years. It's really expensive having a billboard, so that's why they don't have it anymore. But it really it's very hyper local. It depends on where you're at. Some places will allow you to put up a billboard, and then some places you can't even, print a flyer.
Hi, so I'm an accountant, and we're industry focusing on the cannabis industry because it's an emerging market. Oh, you can't hear me? So I'm an accountant, and my focus right now is growing our practice in the cannabis industry. And so we've seen a lot of companies, in order to go public, using the Canadian public stock exchange. I'm wondering if you have any insight as to the financial services you would be looking for as you're growing, as you're kind of looking to take the next step in terms of like gaining more equity, like how you kind of see the future path, and in terms of like, you know, regulatory, accounting, like all those things, like, you know, could you?
So there are a lot of folks going public nowadays. A bunch of my friends, actually, which is cool to see them, you know, getting $30 million for their company, you know, $60 million for their company. Like, that's been really incredible. The valuations right now, I mean, the only people that are coming down and really buying up companies and putting them on the market are the Canadian companies.
Yeah.
So that's been another kind of interesting kind of angle, because now you've got all these Canadian companies coming down buying American companies, and the money is going back to Canada. So, you know, and they're big companies. You know, we're not talking small. Like, you know, who was that who just bought? Yeah, and that was, how much was that? $5 billion. Something crazy.
Is there a big disparity between, like, is there a big gap between small business and then these big companies that
There's
are
a huge
going,
gap. Yeah,
going to
there's a
going
huge gap
and
right
trading?
now, and it's
Okay.
because they can afford to operate and at a loss right now, where most folks can't, because the regulations have been constantly changing, packaging regulations, like all these things. Smaller companies have been trying to keep up,
Yeah.
and they're losing money, whereas these big companies, they got millions of dollars in capital, so they're able to operate at a loss. I believe Ease operates at $1 million loss a month. You know, like who can afford that?
Yeah.
A month, per month, $1 million. Yeah.
I
So-
guess my goal as a professional is to kind of narrow this like disparity between like the, you know, up and coming versus the big guns, you know. It's kind of just a community issue that I'm like looking at in terms of like, you know, how we can narrow that, and just getting your feedback is helpful as well.
I mean, I've really been, I've been looking to try and find funders that can help me make the exit that I want. And that's almost like a strategic partnership, you know? So I think to take us to the next level, we need access to capital. We need access to these big institutional investors that can help us with our vision and help us, give us the juice that we need to move forward, you know? So it really all boils down to access to capital and access to good capital. You know, I mentioned before how there's a lot of big business kind of coming in and leveraging these equity applicants to their own advantage, and people feel powerless. And so education, technical assistance, and really supporting these small businesses and kind of helping them along their path, because I mean, it's really tough going against, you know, some of these big folks who have operating agreements that are 60 pages, and they put this in front of an equity applicant and tell them to sign. So, yeah, I mean, what it all circles back to is we need access to money, and not just money, but good money. Exactly. That's where all the money's coming from right now. Private equity firms and Canada. Yeah.
Well, our company has done something completely outside of criminal areas. We are in 60 days, we are going to fully implement cryptocurrency into our purchasing, our credit card processing, and our commissions.
So we had the cryptocurrency, but we have a question here real quick, and then we're going to wrap up. If you want to comment on crypto.
Yeah, no, I don't want to comment on crypto. So I'd actually just like to piggyback on what you were saying, in that, what you were asking how we get to that place, right? That looks like a more equitable industry. I think it's that we have to be actively involved on the policy side, as Amber was saying. That is crucial, making sure that the licensing structure reflects priorities that make sense for us. That access to capital. I mean, look, to draw from, a stupid analogy, folks didn't think that there was going to be an audience for Black Panther. They didn't think there was going to be an audience for Crazy Rich Asians. There is, and we're proving it at the box office. There is a community of people, and we need to stand together as people of color, as marginalized communities, to make sure that we are coming together and finding these funding sources, the private equity funds, and really making sure that these communities are getting access to it. That's how we make it more equitable.
Awesome. So we'll have our last question from Jennifer.
So I feel kind of silly asking this, and I'm hoping I'm just completely and totally overthinking this. But as a mother, and as a self-described woman, and as someone who understands that systems like to pile up on people, specifically people of color and marginalized communities in general, like specifically poor Black and brown people, right? So I guess with the huge stigma around marijuana, calling it a drug, what kind of protections or do you see any problems at all with parents when they do grow their own plants in their houses? So you say you can have 6 plants per anyone who's over 18 years old. So if someone comes in and it's a child in the house, would that be a problem? Do you see folks that being used against women or against mothers per se? I guess that's kind of what my question is surrounding, because when I think about a huge barrier to me even engaging with the industry, my child is the biggest one, specifically with the knowledge that these things have been used against folks who look like me, who have my last name, who come from where I come from, to take away my children from me. So I guess that's kind of a little bit what my question is surrounding around. Do you see a huge issue with that, or do you have any recommendations so that we can avoid those issues? Because I know that there's been problems when parents do medicate their children with different things, and then they cross state borders, and now it's considered child abuse. So those kinds of questions, I guess, I have surrounding all of this.
So in my mind, there's 2 issues there: medicating your child versus having medication that's for you in the home. And it's funny to me that folks get so hung up on growing plants. We have a craft beer industry in New York, and you can grow beer or process beer in your home, but the reality is most people don't. And so the reality is it's hard to grow marijuana. It's not something that's easy. It takes equipment, power, energy, a lot of different resources that most people probably won't be doing it. But to your point about being a mother, absolutely it's an issue. We see all the time in New York. A friend of mine, Janella Chin, is a physician. She has a free clinic in Chinatown, and she sees all the time women come in whose children have been taken, and once they get a medical card, the children are returned. So in terms of how we address that, it's policy. We need to make sure that these rules protect not only parents with children, but also employees who are taking their medicine in their place of business or outside of the place of business, and it doesn't affect them whatsoever. I mean, right now we have the medical operators are actually drug testing their employees. I mean, to me, that makes no sense, but it's to address the issue of diversion, as Amber was saying, is such an issue.
In California, it used to be a really big problem of folks, women working within the industry or working with the plant growers, having their kids taken away. Like that was a really big issue. With legalization, I would say that's been mitigated quite a bit, because now we've got some parameters and there's laws and rules in place. You can't come in and take someone's child from them when they're growing 6 plants or less. But the minute you go outside of those guidelines that they've set, you're definitely setting yourself up for a bad time. So yeah, I would say with legalization and with policy, a lot of that was able to get fixed.
Well, and with that being said, policy is where it's at, right? I want to thank our amazing speakers, panelists who are here in California and New York. Want to thank all of you. I want to thank everyone who has
Thank you.